Good afternoon to colleagues in Tokyo, and good morning to colleagues in Europe and in Africa and in the US. Just welcome to all of you to this seminar series on the future of higher education, and it's being run by Tokyo College, and I'm really pleased to be able to kind of be involved in it and to moderate these sessions. Today we are very honored really to have with us Professor Sabelo NDLOVU-GATSHENI, who is at the University of Bayreuth in Germany, where he is the chair of Epistemologies of the Global South. Somebody who's been writing about this stuff for a long time. He holds several, in addition to this position at the University of Bayreuth, he holds a number of honorary positions around the world, and I won't go through all of them. But just to say that he's a prolific scholar. He's already authored nine monographs. He's edited 12 volumes on these topics, and being a Zimbabwean national, he's really a citizen of the world and a citizen of Africa. And I want to just also say that some of his early work has indeed been on Zimbabwe. And his latest work, which is titled "The Turmoil in the World of Knowledge Towards an Epistemic Revolution," has yet to appear, but I'm really looking forward to engaging with that. Today, he's going to be speaking about the politics of knowledge and the imperative of decolonization. And just to also say that I need to make a little announcement, which is that this seminar will be uploaded on Tokyo College's YouTube channel. And so if you participate in the Q&A session, please understand that if your camera is on, your face and your name will appear in the Q&A on the YouTube channel. If you don't want that, then please switch off the camera. But with that, I'm going to now hand over to Professor NDLOVU-GATSHENI. He'll speak for about 25 minutes, and then we'll have the opportunity for some discussion. With that, let me hand over to you, Sabelo. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. If my voice sounds very queer, I have some flu, but let me try to project it as much as possible. Thank you so much for the invitation to these dialogues, and I like the concept of the dialogue. If I was present physically, I was not going to give a presentation. I was actually going to lead a conversation on one aspect of which I think is important for the higher education. I see that the previous colleagues have spoken about the future scenarios of higher education. They've spoken about the critical university studies. They've spoken about knowledge as public good. They've spoken about a particular university, University of Nelson Mandela University. They've spoken about democratic mission of the university. And I think after me, there will be another talk on knowledge diplomacy. I thought, let me address one aspect, which is the aspect of the challenges which we are facing at the moment in terms of knowledge itself. The knowledge of knowledge itself. I think there's really some dispute over knowledge itself. There are key epistemological issues which we need to confront directly, and I will try to zero on those and then link them with the decolonization question, and I hope I will be able to do that in 25 minutes. Let me start by making a reference to Immanuel Wallerstein, who spoke about uncertainties of knowledges. Uncertainties of knowledge, and I think is one question which in higher education is actually haunting us at the moment. And this uncertainty is really about the reopened basic epistemological questions, of which we seem not to have adequate answers to them. And these reopened epistemological questions, they have implications for how we think about the future of higher education. And these basic epistemological questions, which I will outline very soon, these basic epistemological questions, they have become even more topical now within a context of what I will call a resurgent and the insurgent decolonization of the 21st century. And as my title of my paper says, I'm more informed by my experience from Africa, from South Africa, and also my experience from where I'm based here at the University of Bayreuth in Germany, where some of the issues, the way we saw them in South Africa, here they seem to see them a bit different. Here, if I can put it, we have been confronted with what they've said is a ideologically driven knowledge vis-a-vis scientifically driven knowledge. This has been a major question here at the University of Bayreuth, whereby they think those who are working with the decolonization school, they produce ideologically driven knowledge. And then there are some of colleagues who are saying, no, ours is actually scientific driven knowledge. And this has made me really to then go back to the basic epistemological questions. And this is what I want to share as the first part of this presentation. And the question is, what are those basic epistemological questions which are open now? And I will try to summarize them. I think there are 5, if not 4. I think one of the basic epistemological questions which has come back to and requiring us to respond is the question of where does knowledge come from? It's a basic epistemological question, and I think is not new, but it is back now in the higher education sector. Where does knowledge come from? Then the second one is the question of what is the relationship between knowledge and identity? I'm not sure whether in Japan, in Southeast Asia, there are those questions as well. But that's a question which is also haunting us in the higher education sector at the moment. The question of is there any link between identities and the knowledge? And then the third one is the question of whether there is any role of geography in knowledge production. What is the place of geography in knowledge production? That also is a question which emerges, and I will try to demonstrate how they are emerging. Then there is a fourth one, which is also a basic epistemological question, which is haunting us in the higher education sector. The question of our experiences, the experience, or if you like, you call it biography. What is the role of biography or experience in knowledge? When we generate knowledge, do we suspend our biographies, our experiences, in order to be scientific, so to speak? Then lastly, of course, is the perennial question of the link between knowledge and ideology. So I thought those are the 5 reopened epistemological questions. And if you go back to how we were all trained, and I will make that generalization because I was trained in history. One of the issues was that whenever the question of identity, for instance, was raised, we were warned never to say I, never to say we. And the idea was that if you are saying that, you are already becoming subjective. So there is the traditional conception was that you need to be objective, scientific, detached, and you need to produce a disembodied knowledge, if I can put it that way. Then when it came to geography, again, the issue was that the knowledge which we produce must be universally relevant across space and time. In other words, it must be truthful across space and time. Then when it came to biography and the experience, again, the flag of objectivity, partiality, being scientific, was what we were actually trained, that you need to aspire for that. It's a very, 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 very difficult aspiration, but we need to aspire to that. Then when it came to ideology, the idea was that we try to be as neutral as possible. Let's not project our politics into knowledge. But I think those questions today, they've returned. For instance, if you look at, because as for me, I work with the decolonial, the post-colonial, and the epistemologies of the global south. I found that in that context, you have a different take on these questions. For instance, you will find that we have colleagues within the decolonial school who think that we need to maybe project that epistemology frames ontology. Knowledge frames a reality. So there's that school which actually tries to push that idea that everything which we know, all what we know, what we name as state, as society, as you cannot do that unless you have a particular knowledge. So they then play with that relationship between ontology and reality. I'm sorry, epistemology and reality. But they also, when it comes to issues of identity and the knowledge, you will find that in the decolonial, post-colonial, and epistemologies of the global south, there is a clear argument that in knowledge, there is eco-politics. There is eco-politics, there is body politics in knowledge. Knowledge is embodied. There is also what is known as locus of enunciation. You don't think from nowhere, you think from somewhere. So there is, perhaps if I can put it, they also bring in the question of social location, your sexual orientation, your class, your race, so many of the identities, that those ones, they don't get suspended as you produce knowledge. They actually influence the way we produce knowledge. Then when it comes to geography and the knowledge, again, you'll find that in decolonial, post-colonial debates, it's very clear that there is an emphasis on geopolitics of knowledge. That there is for instance, if you go to the Caribbean Philosophical Association, their mission is really shifting the geography of knowledge. In other words, they think there is really geography influences knowledge. But again, we must not take it literally that they mean the physical geography. They mean something more complex than that. And you will know that also, even from the continent, you have Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who says, who talks about moving the center. Moving the center, again, it can be reduced that he's talking about geography, but if you read Ngugi closely, he is not talking about geography only. Of course, he raises the argument that Europe has been dominant, but he also raises the argument that there is also a class question. The bourgeois, minority white male bourgeois, producing knowledge for the majority. So he says we need to shift also from the minority to the majority, which can be the working class, the peasants. And he also, in that very idea of moving the center, he also raises the question of gender, that it is generally males or men who produce knowledge, so they then tend to marginalize knowledge produced by women. So there is that, and again, as you know from studies of gender studies, the situated knowledges, standpoints, and all that, they all bring us to have a more complicated understanding of the geopolitics of knowledge. Then when it comes to the place of biography, experience in knowledge, again, the post-colonial, the decolonial, they bring in what they call body politics of knowledge. That knowledge is embodied. We think from our bodies. You remember the Cartesian idea of mind-body duality. They try to complicate that, and it goes as far back as the 17th century when Anton William Amo, who was a black philosopher in Europe, was beginning to challenge René Descartes' idea of the body and the mind as separate, and the beginning to say there is feeling, there is emotion, there are all these, and then that is carried over into the negritude movement and the other movements. We are bringing in the issue of emotion and also the issue of feelings into this problematizing the Cartesian thinking. But you can also, they are bringing in the question of biography more prominently, so much so that instead of shifting only the geography of knowledge, there is also the idea that we needed to shift the biography of knowledge. And what does that mean? That fundamentally means that shifting the biography of knowledge, it means in a discipline like sociology, for instance, you have the canon, maybe Max Weber, Karl Marx, Durkheim, and what does it mean to shift the biography of these are dead white men, if I can put it that way. It means therefore that when you shift the biography of knowledge, you also shift from the dead to the living first. There are many people who are alive who are also producing knowledge. Why should we always be hostage to those who are dead? Secondly, you will find that even within Eurocentric thinking, you will find that it is men who dominate. And the question of women also comes in, that when we are saying shifting the biography, you need also to shift that women have also been producing knowledge. Then thirdly, when we say shift biography, you shift also from white European men to all other people in the global south, in Japan, everywhere. You need to shift in terms of the biography, in terms of the bodies which actually produce knowledge. And then, of course, I don't want to waste your time on the issue of ideology. I think even in Eurocentric thinking, there was an idea from Michel Foucault's idea of knowledge power. There was already an acceptance that this issue of neutrality, knowledge is political. Hence, I spoke about the politics of knowledge. So this basically is a summary of what I wanted to present as the politics of knowledge. And the question which then arises is how adequate have we really taken these questions? Of course, I've been trying to read around how we've responded to these questions. Of course, as I said, here at the University of Bayreuth, there is the idea that we need to be scientific. That's another take, that we need to be scientific. We need not to be ideological. But what is even more important, I think, for us is that those who are working with the geopolitics, biopolitics of knowledge and all that, and those who are working with the scientific, what brings us together? What brings us together is actually the search for truth, as far as I'm concerned. And the issue is, if I hide my identity, if I hide my geographical location, if I hide my experience in production knowledge, am I moving towards more truth, or am I actually distorting things? And if I put them on the table and I say, I am Sabelo NDLOVU, I'm from Zimbabwe, I spent my years in South Africa, this influenced the way I'm thinking, am I moving more closer to truth? So there is that. I don't think the bifurcation of saying something is scientific and something is ideological is very helpful, because those who claim to be scientific, as far as I'm concerned, their success is only to hide their identities. And once you hide your identities in the production of knowledge, we think there is something sinister which you are trying to hide beyond that. So there is that. And I think, I'm not sure whether in Japan how you work with it, but there is this issue that if you go to Australia, if you go to the United States, if you go to France, there was an attempt to ban critical race theory, an attempt to condemn decolonial, post-colonial thinking, attempt to say this is identitarian politics. Even in France, they try to link it with what they call Islamo-leftism, trying to link it even with the terrorism. I don't think that is an adequate a response to this. We need to really rise to it more seriously than that. It's a question which has come to haunt us, and there is a question which as long as we aspire to achieve to attain truth, I think we need to take these questions into account. I also don't have answers to them. I'm putting them on the table so that we discuss them. Then the second part of my presentation, I don't want to take long. Sometimes when I start speaking, I don't keep quiet. I go on and on. The second part of my presentation is also to go back to the question of decolonization, because these reopened epistemological questions, they are actually reopened because of the insurgence and the resurgence of decolonization in the 21st century. But the first basic question is, can knowledge be colonized? That is a question which we need to refer to. Can it be colonized? And I think if we go to Steve Biko's argument about the most important weapon in the mind of the oppressor is the control of the mind of the oppressed, it fundamentally challenges us to say, how do some people control the minds of others? And I think that also becomes a useful entry point into understanding the issue of how knowledge is colonized. And I don't think it was Steve Biko only. Even if you go to Antonio Gramsci, he talks about the ideas of the ruling elite dominating the world. So there is something which actually links with the whole issue of colonizing knowledge. And here I want to introduce two concepts and they move very fast forward. One is the cognitive empire, the empire which invades the mental universe of a people in order to impose particular forms of knowledge, and using that would then extend to the concept which comes from the Latin American school, which is the concept of coloniality of knowledge. How particular knowledges move along with the power, along with imperialism, along with colonialism, along with capitalism, to displace other knowledges and they impose particular knowledges. And I think I subscribe to the idea that it's possible to colonize knowledge. But I think what is even more important for us, if we are thinking about the future of the academy, particularly thinking about it, I'm not sure from Southeast Asia, I'm not sure from Japan, but on the African continent, one aspect which is very important, which is challenging us at the moment, is the issue that there are some thinkers who think that at the moment we must not be talking about how knowledge is colonized. What we must be talking about is the global economy of knowledge. And they tell us that if we think that way, then what we must actually invest our energies is the issue of collaborations, partnerships, and all that. And they tell us that the center periphery type of thinking is a 1970s type of thinking, is not a 21st century type of thinking. Fair and fine, I wish things were like that, but I don't think they are like that in reality. In reality, from having developed my own intellectual career from Africa, I know that there is still an even intellectual division of labor within the global economy of knowledge. I still, even here where I'm based in the University of Bayreuth, I see people going to Africa to go and gather data. Making Africa really a field. They are divided into so many colleagues here who go there to gather data, and there is still that asymmetry between Africa as a mine for data and Europe as the producer of theory. I think there is that, and I spend most of my time here dealing with the doctoral and postdoctoral scholars. And my idea has always been to try to disrupt this idea that data is African, theory is European. How do we come to that? But all that is actually framed by power dynamics and the resources dynamics. And also the issue of, I think it was Pauline Mutonji from Benin who raised the issue of intellectual or academic dependence. And I think there is still that. And also new issues which the higher education sector must also take into account, the issue of citational power. The citational power, who is cited, who constitute the canon, who is marginalized, there is an impression that even if you write 20 books, you don't exist, and nobody, as for me, having created my own career from Africa, I know who to cite in order for my article to be accepted. But those very people, they have nobody nudges them to say, you cannot have your article cited if you don't cite Sabelo. There is nothing like that. They can still go ahead. So there are all these dynamics, and also the dynamics of publishing, and which is also, I'm now not talking about theory. I'm talking really about practical issues. Where do you publish in order to be recognized, in order for your work to carry weight? Obviously, the major presses and the major journals are still located in Europe and in North America, and also the issue of language, and I think that is also an important aspect which we need to reflect on, the issue of language. What language do we use to teach, to research, and to learn? On the African continent, I think in Japan is different. They are using Japanese. So it is important that we also, this is where the issue of locus of enunciation becomes. You can't generalize about issues. It depends where you are standing. So from Africa, we still have that question. It might not be a question in Japan. Then maybe I move towards the conclusion. But one of the issues which I wanted to say is that what is the impact of this issue of the cognitive empire and the coloniality of knowledge? I think it affects, particularly from where I'm standing. I'm based in Europe, but I'm still thinking from the continent. So I've moved geographically, but I don't think I've moved epistemically. I still think projected things from the continent. And one of the issues is that this issue of science versus ideology, it has actually impacted on how we produce knowledge. There are some colleagues who think about radical emulation and assimilation, and who think objectivity, unsituatedness, universal truth, cognitive neutrality, these are standard and the protocols of good scholarship. Then there are others who are trying to balance the two, that they take, let's not throw away issue of standards, let's not do this, but at the same time, let's bring in the African, whom I think it was Tsepo Madlingos who talks about the liminary space, those who operate in the liminary space. Then there are others who then take another problematic direction, which we will call radical alterity or radical difference, whereby they then say we have our own African knowledge, our own, and that also creates a major problem, because you end up falling into nativism, into ghettoization and other problems. Then, of course, because of the difficulties, economic and otherwise, you will find that there is a scholarship which I would describe as sycophantic and a comparative position, whereby you just produce a scholarship for survival. You become a flatterer of those in power in order to you don't say truth to power. And then, of course, the return of the decolonial in the attempt to think and complicate the issues from that perspective. And then the last issue, last two issues which I wanted to talk about is also that I'm not sure if thinking from South Asia or Latin America, from the Caribbean, but what I've realized is that in Africa, when we're thinking about knowledge, there is also the existential questions. And I think the existential questions, they also are reflected in the Black radical tradition, whereby you have really existential questions which translate to epistemological questions. And they make the whole ballgame more complex. For instance, if you go back to the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, when he's asking, what does it mean to be defined as a problem? Or you go to Emir Cizé, who am I, what are we, who are we in this anti-Black world, or something like that. And then you begin to see that the question of history in African thought is also an existential question. To be a people who are said to have no history, it actually drives a lot of our thinking in trying to say, but we are human beings, we have history, we have all this. Then a question of development, that because of colonialism was actually taking away the African agency, and it was creating an impression, these are people who cannot help themselves, they need to be helped from somewhere. And that raises the question of development and then the question of identity, which I talked about, also arises within that, and the question of self-determination. And all these, they are actually inextricably intertwined with the epistemic questions. And what I wanted to, I will jump a lot of issues so that we have time to discuss. I wanted also to talk about so far the struggles for epistemic freedom or epistemic sovereignty, if you like. What I had tried to do was to think about the phases in those struggles: the black radical turn, the nationalist turn, the gender feminist turn, the post-colonial turn, and now the resurgent and the insurgent decolonization of the 21st century. But we will discuss that. I don't think I have time to go into it. What I want to end with is, what are the decolonial tasks of the future? I saw one colleague was talking about the critical questions of higher education. Here, there are also the decolonial tasks. And I think, again, when we're talking about the decolonial tasks of the future, we need not to scratch our heads. Movements like Roads Must Fall movements like Black Lives Matter, they've already put on the agenda what we need to think about. I think the first thing from the Roads Must Fall movement is that we need to revisit the idea of the university itself. We need to think about it, particularly in the context of Africa. We have universities in Africa. Are they yet African universities which are actually carrying the burden of the African problems? That's one. And of course, in the context of South Africa, they also raised the iconography question, the question of the colonial and apartheid symbols, which proved that they were not only a problem of South Africa, because after that, we had all these statues across the world being attacked, which were still standing. So it means it was not just the Rhodes, which was at the center of the University of Cape Town. We still have the signatures of imperialism, colonialism across the world. And from Rhodes Must Fall, it moved to a planetary scale. And then, of course, one issue which is very important for higher education, particularly also thinking about it from the continent, is the issue of funding for higher education. In the 1960s, in the 70s, the state was funding higher education. Then it fell into crisis. Then the public education sector collapsed. How do we bring the state again to understand that the development which they are trying to push, it must be founded on knowledge. It must be knowledge-driven development. And to have knowledge-driven development, you will need to invest in the production of knowledge itself. And it means the state needs to, again, play a role in and then, of course, on the African continent, we still have the question of language. There are between 2,500 and 3,000 languages on the continent. And we can't just throw away that resource and take 6 languages which are from Europe and they make them the foundation of the education sector. I think we'll be losing really the richness of the African continent. And then, of course, the universities across the world. My friend Ramon Grossvogel talks about them as westernized universities across the world, that they have institutional cultures which needs to change in accordance with the way you are located. The institutional cultures which are very troublesome. When I was at the University of South Africa, I was working in the Vice Chancellor's office, and they were trying to deal with these institutional cultures, particularly the patriarchal, the sexist, the racist, the ethnic, as well as the xenophobic type of cultures. They are there, and I think we need to think about them. Then we need also one of the issues which are very important at the moment is the question of knowledge and the curriculum. Even here at Bayreuth, we still deal with those questions of curriculum and the knowledge. And I think, Prof. Bauer, I will stop here. It has made my flu sounds better. I think talking is very important.
Thank you so much. There's so much to unpack there, and and as you point out, I mean, I think it's the kind of the kind of sort of engagement where we need to sit around the table and kind of go at it with with time on hand. So I'm just going to kick off, and I'll just wait for people to put their hands up. So please feel free to put your hands up or just scream out, and I'll and then we'll take your questions. But let me just kick off. And you referred to the Fees-Must-Fall, Roads-Must-Fall campaigns in South Africa, and I've tried to say, just here in Japan, at least, just how important those student movements were, and they really shook not just the universities, but shook the nation as a whole. The one question I do have is, is the place of indigenous knowledge in your analysis? I mean, so you mentioned earlier, one of the questions you asked is, can knowledge be colonized? I mean, the really big question is, it appears to me, at least, to be a social justice issue around surfacing, into our formal knowledge kind of context, indigenous knowledges. Is that something that you like to comment on?
Yeah. I think the question of, I think it was my colleague at the University of South Africa, Jimmy Atensina, when he was asked, he was pushing this idea of endogeneity. And he said, but endogeneity in simple terms, meaning taking ourselves seriously. It means also, as long as we agree that we're also human beings, it means there are other knowledges which we can project from where we are, which fundamentally are not disconnected from other knowledges. This is why I always want to come with the locus of enunciation. That locus of enunciation means also you take into account the knowledges which are around you as you move into the world of knowledges. They say the major problem, I think it was what Nguku Thiongo put in 1968, 1969 with the colleagues, that when they were speaking about abolition of the English department, people took it to mean abolishing in the truth just to abolish it. But I think the idea was to reconfigure. And the reconfiguring means the knowledges of the department is in Kenya, it is in Africa. It can't start with the Shakespeare in the United Kingdom. It needs to start with the knowledges around there, the continental knowledge, the knowledge of the global south, then English literature. So you reconfigure that way. So that's how I think about indigenous knowledge systems. I think there is indeed, and now it becomes even more prominent in a world whereby the inflation of capitalism into knowledge and the way it has resulted into environmental and ecological problems. I think it actually provokes us to say, but there are other ways of dealing with these issues, which are not about extractivism only. In the indigenous African knowledges, they had a better way of maintaining ecosystems, in the sense that of course, in the Eurocentric sense, they were saying that they are failing to rise above nature. So, in the state of nature, in the Hobbesian sense. But I think there was beauty in that, in agreeing that human beings and the other beings are actually at one level, and they need each other and they need to mutually recognize each other, themselves. And even Nguku Thiongo, when he defines a decolonization, he says we must consciously and coldly think about what imperialism has been doing to ourselves and the other selves in the universe. In other words, that relationship, to re-establish that relationship in the universe. And the trees being another self, water being another self, mountains being another selves, human beings being another self. But this idea that the human is above the other selves, and the human therefore has the autonomy to exploit the other self ad infinitum, that's what causes the problems. So it's important really to then bring in the indigenous knowledge systems to say, Sabelo is I'm a human being, but I'm Ndlovu. How do I link with an elephant? And that linkage was the sophistication of the civilization in linking the human and the other vital forces around. And I think it's important to think about it that way.
Thank you. So just for our colleagues, just to know that the word Ndlovu, which is Professor Ndlovu's surname, means elephant. Like so. Lydia, please come in.
Thank you very much, Professor Ndlovu, for your very interesting points and very important questions I consider that you pointed out here in science. I have just one question for you. What do you think the interdisciplinary studies that are growing up last years very, very fast, do they contribute for searching the balance between the influence of the one person or two people identity, ideology, geography, in order to balance this knowledge that we present? Thank you.
That's a very important question, and thank you so much. I think one issue for certain, when I was talking about the reopened epistemological questions, I think the other one really relates to the disciplinary organization of knowledge. Knowledge being organized into disciplines. We've been working with this knowledge for years, if not for centuries. Knowledge being organized into disciplines. And if you go to, say, Michel Foucault, he will put it very clearly that, but modern disciplines emerged within modern history to solve particular modern problems. The major problem which I see is that maybe, particularly when I was thinking about it from where I was located on the continent in Africa, disciplines became sort of fashion. That if you have a university, you must have psychology, you must have philosophy, you must have this, and then nobody really thought about them. How relevant are they to the issues of the day? And then the second problem with the disciplines, I think, it comes from the work of Louis R. Gordon, and I will recommend the book Disciplinary Decadence. That is an important book, because it then says people are approaching disciplines as though they were not born. They live and they will die. And he puts it so much that we tend then to ontologize and reify disciplines. And then we squat in front of them and worship, to the extent that if I was presenting here, I will just tell you, as a historian, this is how I think. As a psychologist, this is how I think. As a what? Disciplines become specifically like my lenses here. They enable me to see other things and not to see other things. And I think is very problematic. Then the decolonial part, which comes straight to your question about the interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, or transdisciplinarity, so to speak. The problem is, if disciplines carry the gene of coloniality, sociology carries the gene of coloniality, psychology carries the gene of coloniality, history carries anthropology. If you mix them together, does it remove the coloniality? That is the question. Does it remove the coloniality which they carry, or, in the words of Ramon Grossvogel, you create what he calls the colonial soup? It becomes a colonial, a colonial soup. But in my thinking, with the roads must fall, I always thought it's a good moment to rethink the disciplines. And how do we rethink the disciplines? We think about their relevance, the value for money for those who pay to come and study. So we need to think really about how relevant are they to African questions, to African issues. Do we need to still continue with the organizing knowledge in disciplinary terms? You know, in decolonial thinking, there is also a question that, are you invested in disciplinary problems, or are you invested in problems facing humanity? So that also becomes, and at the moment, I'm in a position which is very interesting because I have a chair in Epistemologies of the Global South. But I was trained as a historian. When I came here at the University of Bayreuth, the idea was that quickly you must find your home. In other words, I must go either to history or to politics, or then I said, no, you are misunderstanding things. I ran away from those homes deliberately so that I'm able to operate across. So what I do from the chair in Epistemologies of the Global South, I teach into history, into global history, I teach into anthropology, I teach into development studies. So I feel free that way, that I go into those spaces. But if I go back to the so-called homes, it means I must go back to history and forget about development studies, forget about these other aspects. So it is indeed an important question which we need, the higher education need to think about it. We need not to ontologize disciplines as though they were not born, they were for particular problems. And if the problems today are like what they are, it means we need to rethink the disciplines. And the interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary was an attempt to solve it, but I don't think is adequate to the challenge.
Thank you so much. Sabir Ibrahim, come in, please.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Tokyo College, and thank you for my mentor, Sabelo. It is a great opportunity to listen to you, and whenever I listen to him, and it's very inspiring, to read more and to know more. My question is quite about the current and decolonized educations, which is continue to produce deeply westernized elites, most culturally dependent, those mostly culturally dependent. That means losing identity, exactly as Missouri put it very clear in this. So the identification, to identify that crisis of relevance is in twofold, practical and cultural. The practical aspect refers to the skill of the graduates. The graduate itself, what kind of skill that they have. And cultural dimension is related to the values. What values that we have from these Western educations. As a way forward, I don't know how should to formulate this question, but it to me is there is a various way to decolonize modernity itself. This modernity is, by the way, so disaster to us. We will take nothing from this so-called modernity. So the problem of identities, the problem of knowledge emergings need to be addressed. How long it takes us to uncolonize and decolonize the elite itself.
Thank you so much. Sabelo, do you we have to finish at 3, unfortunately. So I'm going to ask you to be as brief as possible.
Yeah. I think what Shabia is raising is really the difficulty of decolonizing. And the difficulty of decolonizing is that is not about pointing fingers somewhere, but is to point fingers to ourselves as modern subjects.
Yes, that's right.
I think that is an important challenge, because I cannot pretend that I'm not a modern subject myself, that I was not produced by the westernized university myself. So I carry the problems which I'm trying to deal with. So that creates these challenges which I think my colleague is raising. Is like really trying to run away from our shadows.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Thank you so much. Dada, please come in.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Of course, go ahead.
Hi. Hi, thank you very much for coming today to share with us your thoughts and ideas. And thanks as well to Professor Bawa for organizing this fantastic series of series with the brilliant speakers. I wanted to share with our guest speaker that I have actually recently read and cited his work titled African Decolonization's Past and Present Trajectories for my paper on post-colonial monuments in my hometown in the Philippines. Which was colonized multiple times for over 400 years, forming colonial soup, as you mentioned earlier. I was particularly struck by what you wrote in your paper called what you called epistemic break, led by decolonization movements. In your paper, you wrote about the #Rhodes Must Fall movement led by students as an example of what you called an epistemic break. I think people from settler and post-colonial countries know that at the center of our plazas, parks are violent monuments, right? That represent conquerors, religious leaders, and colonists. Here in Japan, as we are here in Japan currently, for example, the island of Okinawa, indigenous land becomes national monuments for Japanese and foreign tourists, right? So in the case of Rhodes Must Fall movement, Rhodes statues fell all over Africa and Europe, and this movement gained momentum globally. Soon after that, many other colonial monuments were toppled as far as Australia, New Zealand, and in Belgium, even in Belgium. The government itself took down its own monument of King Leopold, right? Along with an apology for their violence in Central Africa. So my question that I wanted to ask is, because he also mentioned production of knowledge by, as in the case of Rhodes Must Fall movement. How about post-colonial production of knowledge in places which are suffering from, a colonial soup, like those which are multiply colonized and where production is not really just by academics, but by people who have who gather a lot of audiences for their work, like artists, for example. For example, in my hometown, as I referenced in my paper, I asked what decolonization looks like for a town that has a that has a statue or a monument of Black indigenous people at the very center of our town, even if the indigenous people portrayed in the monument don't even live there. And for the people in my hometown, putting a racialized statue there was a way of honoring indigenous peoples in our region. But at the same time, the placement of that monument plays up the discourse of, like scientific racism from Europe that pins Blackness and indigeneity at the very bottom of the civilizational ladder, right? So what does it also mean from my hometown? Because in my hometown, we also have a monument, a small Washington monument, which is like a little bit taller than me, because the people who were former U.S. Navy men and who retired in my hometown built this monument in honor of their service to the U.S. Navy, even if they worked as ritualized stewards in the U.S. Navy. And we also have what we call an unknown monument, unknown soldier monument, but the monument itself does not name for which war the soldiers had fought. Was it against Japan? Was it against Spain, or in collaboration with the colonizers, or is it a soldier against Filipinos against each other? So what do we make of such monuments which are so difficult, and how can, as decolonial scholars, my background is anthropology, how would it look like for us if decolonization, if we understand, I think, what colonization means and what could it mean, how would it look like, and how would we not alienate the people that we would like to work for? Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you for sharing the Philippines challenges. Indeed, is not even confined to that space. It's confined to many other spaces. The challenges are as difficult as you put them. But I think one thing for certain, why I always want to go back to the Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall, and think about potential break or rupture. Which is yet to come, because it was hijacked here and there by us who are located within the university, and we redisciplined it back into what we are familiar with. It needs the struggle. That struggle needs to continue. Is not that it delivered what it intended to deliver. But what I can say related to your questions is that, of course, one thing for certain which is very helpful about now, the question of the university being the only site of knowledge production is no longer sustainable. I think we are beyond that. There are other sites of knowledge production. Two, I think what the roads must fall in the Black Lives Matter and the other movements have also raised, they've pushed the university, the legitimacy of the university itself. You know, some universities were implicated in slavery, in colonialism, in racism, in patriarchy. So there is also the legitimacy question, and that is on the table. Then there is thirdly, the institutional. Should knowledge really be in the ivory tower, or knowledge is in society? And I think what you are raising is really the idea that knowledge is in the society, in the indigenous communities, and we need to also deploy what we call epistemic humility. And the epistemic humility means the ability to go to the communities to learn, not to adopt the what we call the civilizing mission type of approach to knowledge. We are from the university, we know, we go to the communities, we go to teach. I think that has shifted. We need to shift now and really listen more to the communities. That is where knowledge lies. So that would be basically my few reflections on what we have put. And then finally, the issue of monuments. In knowledge is a monument standing. It is not like the Cecil John Rhodes statue, which is physical, you can point on it. But Eurocentric knowledge is a monument which is yet to fall. And I think it will be important to take it that way. And this monument is even more tricky because it is in our hearts and minds. This is why I was talking about coloniality of knowledge. Somebody in South Africa during the meekly of the Rhodes Must Fall movement, he said, you are worried about the monument at UCT. What about the Cecil John Rhodes in your heart and in your mind? This is one which needs to fall first, because that one is hidden. You can't see it. You only feel it when somebody expresses that, oh, this Rhodes is still there, is not gone. So those are the complexities. Thank you so much for
great question. Thank you so much, Dada. That takes you back to Biko, Sabelo.
Yeah.
Esther, please come in.
Morning, everybody. I'm Esther, and I am based in SA, so in South Africa, sorry. And I look after Dean of Faculty for the built environment in a private higher education institution. And something I've been quite passionate about, and I think that I experienced, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, is just the experience of decolonization in, I'm from an interior design discipline, and how that was missing in my education at a public higher education institution, both in undergrad and postgrad. And then going into and working in a more of a private higher education institution and trying to bring in decolonization and to try and decolonize what we are doing, the curriculum and everything. And I think currently I'm bumping against lecturers. So not to say that they are not wanting to decolonize or anything like that, but just trying to figure out in a space and in a context where decolonization will not be their passion. So as a part-time lecturer, they come in, they teach, they may be teaching technical drawings, or they may be teaching history, or they may be teaching various subjects, but decolonization isn't them. You know, they're not passionate, or they're not wanting to. So how does one support?
May I ask you to just get to the question? We have to finish at 3, unfortunately.
No problem. Yeah, and I think that's my question: is how does one support, and how does one encourage a lecturer like that to be so? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Esther, for that. I spent all the last 5 years before I left to South Africa trying to push that agenda of making people, not without being told from above, that it must come from us, from inside us, and we must see value in decolonizing. And we must also see value in decolonizing, even here where I'm based. Because as I started, I said the others are thinking it is ideological driven, is not scientific. And I'm always saying, but for good scholarship, if good scholarship ignores the majority world, which is the world of the global south, I doubt how good it is. And I also bring in the question which normally is posed from a feminist point of view, particularly an excellent book which I will recommend, Engendering African Social Science, where they said a social science which ignores 52% of the population is an impoverished science. The same is about knowledge in general. If the knowledge ignores the global south, which is the majority world, and they were using the knowledge of a minority, we are producing impoverished knowledge, as far as I'm concerned. So the issue is, how do we go to our colleagues to convince them that this is meant to improve even their own scholarship, even their own the knowledge, and they make it relevant. The issue of being sophisticated, but the knowledge doesn't produce anything tangible for society, I don't think you can't sleep well with that. It won't be knowledge. So it's important that we convince ourselves, and this takes us to the concept of the learning to unlearn in order to relearn. Mm-hmm. But a lot of colleagues in the higher education, they dig in immediately. You push in the question of decolonization, and they have all sorts of justifications why they don't want to do it. So it means really investing a lot of time in showing them that this is the benefit. If we decolonize, this is what we are going to benefit. It's not about an ideological Berkeley or something like that.
Thank you so much. Professor Morio, last question goes to you.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation. So just a comment. So even if it is very difficult to imagine the colonization of so knowledge production in the context of Africa, but I really realized the imperialism or so colonialism of knowledge so production, especially in the stage of so individual tacit knowledge, a transformation of individual tacit knowledge to institutional explicit knowledge. So that is a publication. Actually, the publication platform is monopolized by Western entities. Yes, but at the same time, so this reminds me some idea that the recent internet dissemination and the current trend of open science or collective knowledge. So based on decentralized knowledge production and dissemination. So it may help or contribute to decolonization of knowledge production. So this is my comment. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes.
No, thank you for that comment. And it's important that it brings in the question of technologies, the internet and the others. You see, technologies are an instrument. They can be an instrument for decolonization. They can also be an instrument for colonization. Nowadays, there is a lot of talk about data colonialism and all these other things. But I think this opportunity that people can publish their arguments without going through any other controlled space, it's an opening. It's important to take into account, but it also has its own underside.
Thank you so much. So that brings us to the end. Just to say thank you so much. Clearly, we needed like 3 hours or something, to, and maybe we'll sort of find, we'll find some way of doing that sometime in the future. Thank you so much. And so just to make the announcement that next week we have a break, but the week after that, on the 1st of March, we have a University of Tokyo's own Professor Kitamura of the Graduate School of Education. And he's going to be speaking on regional collaboration to promote knowledge diplomacy. And we'll send out a notification of that to all of you. Thank you so much, Sabelo. And
thank you. I'm so happy that I managed to sustain it.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.